Welcome back to Trafficking Truths. I'm Rebecca Bender, and today is Myth 5. We are tackling demand. And I need to warn you that viewer and listener discretion is advised. We're going to first talk about some things on the open web that you're going to be shocked by, but then we're really going to do a deep dive into the issue of pornography and really what's affecting our young boys and girls. But I want to leave you with hope. And so I'm asking you to stick with us through the end. We're going to leave by sharing some ways that you can cultivate character and resilience and strength in your children. And so with me, special guests, three incredible people. We have our resident expert, Elizabeth Scaife, that's going to help tell us what's happening, pulse on the ground in this field. Then we have survivor leader and activist and advocate, Marian out of Chicago, Illinois. And last I brought on good friend of mine, co-founder of the Epik Project, a nationally renowned anti-human trafficking organization that seeks to end, disrupt, and eradicate demand. I'm excited to get started, and I thank you for being here with me. What I think you talk about really well is this gang mentality. And so talk to us a little bit about gang trafficking and then break down some of that, if you don't mind spending a few minutes on that, because I find it fascinating.
Yeah, I do too. Gang trafficking, the subject of gang trafficking is something that I got really interested in about 8 years ago. And I just happen to live in a part of the country that has seen a significant amount of gang trafficking and has been in the news because they've been aggressively prosecuting it, right? So gang traffickers have a really interesting mentality. And it's just gangs in general. It's very family centric, right? And it's
Okay.
kind of this, what we would say, a wolf pack mentality. And so what's interesting is that the two prosecutors here who are phenomenal prosecutors on these cases, I'll never forget this very lengthy journal article they wrote where they talked about working with gangs and this collective courage and collective depravity that go hand in hand in working with gangs. And those terms have really sat with me for years because the truth is gangs establish a new norm. They have their own culture within each gang. They have their own culture. And then sometimes that culture gets broken down even more in the sets, depending on what kind of gang it is. Yeah. But they establish their own culture, their own rules, their own hierarchy of leadership and authority. There's a mutual understanding, but within these new values, right, is an altered and sort of deviant perception of the world around them and how they fit in it. And so that collective courage that they experience in committing crimes is much higher than they would if they were a standalone person. Because when you're one person, you're responsible for all aspects of a crime, then the risk is higher, right? And your capacity is reduced. But when you're a gang, you can divide and conquer, right? And so there's a much bigger sort of collective courage. They feed into each other, and as a gang would do more things and have a bigger impact than they would alone, but more so, they feed into each other's depravity. And that's centered around the different norms and values that they set up, which are entirely centered around all of their criminal enterprises. And I think the interesting parallel exists in any group think mentality, because that's what it really is. And you can apply that to any setting. But as far as sex buyers, they also have done the same thing when it comes to child sex trafficking.
Yeah.
They have established a collective depravity. If you ever get into any of these sex buyer forums, the US Sex Guide, the World Sex Guide, like the John boards of any of these.
I mean, wait. We need to you need to break this down. The common person has no clue. I mean, right now people are like, wait a minute. Sex buyers have like groups and forums and places to get together.
Yeah.
Tell everyone.
They have,
so then
I mean, it's
these two, right? Of like, yeah, like you know about it, I know about it. Explain to people a little bit more about where sex buyers hang out together so that they continue to fuel this collective think mentality, and how you see the gang research and work you've been involved in parallel with sex buyers as a whole. Epstein in this group or not, sex buyers as a whole. And so for us, I mean, I definitely view Epstein as a buyer. I can see why he got charged with trafficking, but at its core, he's a buyer.
Yeah. Well, and even just taking Epstein and then tangentially connecting it to this whole culture of these hobbyists. Also, they call
Yep.
themselves mongers. They just travel the world engaging this behavior. That was Epstein. How many
Hey.
people in his world, how many people in Harvey Weinstein's world, how many people that were men within their circle of influence ever actually said to them, you are disgusting, this is immoral and illegal, and you should not be doing, how many people? Or how many people just recklessly disregarded like the behavior that they saw and felt uncomfortable with, right?
Right.
So by that default are contributing to this courage that he alone had, and then with his cronies, I would say. So
So the
it,
buying forums,
the
what's
buying forums,
there?
yep.
Are they on the
So
dark web? Are they where everyone?
everyone's familiar. No one's, it's not unheard of, I don't think, for anyone that knows this issue to know that there's Backpage, that there's perhaps the erotic review, that there are websites where people are sold for sex or are engaging in selling sexual services, right? And so we have the websites, but you also have similar websites or accounts that are available on the website that you can register for yourself, a private user account, and set up a sort of your fake name and whatever else you want to contribute. And within that user account, you're joining with hundreds and oftentimes thousands or hundreds of thousands of other people who are involved in the commercial sex industry as sellers or buyers, most of them buyers, right? And so they're logging in and they're detailing based on their city, state, and country. They are offering details and directions and instructions and encouragement to each other as to where they can go to find sex, who to ask for in these establishments. And then they're rating the women and girls and boys and men that they're involved with. They're rating them on all kinds of scales. They're describing the services they provide. They're describing the quality of services. And it's incredibly grotesque, right? And they're also sharing, if they're involved in street level prostitution acts, then they're sharing where they found people who were outside. Were they young? Were they old? What were their ethnicities and races? They're sharing as much information as they can, because most of them are prolific sex buyers. Most of the people, I venture to say, the majority of people who are involved in the John boards, as we call them, or the sex forums, are habitual buyers. And many of them are businessmen who travel the world. And so they want to know in advance when they're heading to a certain country or a certain place, where can I go to find this? So they'll just pop the question in, hey guys, what's new in Bangkok, Thailand? Where's the best place to go to get young girls who are from Europe in Thailand? And someone else will comment, just like you would on Yelp or any other review site,
Right.
and Google
And it's not
forums.
just international. I mean, it could be anywhere. Hey, heading to Vegas.
Yeah, they are contributing to each other. But not only are they sharing details about the victims that they're involved with, they are also sharing about legislation. I've seen buyers say here in DC, there was one of the most popular prostitution tracks in DC where victims are strolling outdoors is right by an elementary school, and it's 4 blocks from the White House. And I've seen people say, hey, be careful on that corner soliciting, because if you get busted by an undercover cop, that's an additional fine, which is true. If you're caught purchasing or soliciting sex within X amount of feet of a school, then there's a tack on additional fine to that. And they know the laws. These guys are not ignorant. And so they have their own set of core values, their own set of practices, their own way of communicating, their own terminology. They have all of these things individually. So what's interesting in the parallels to your original question, because they've established their own set of norms, and I've shared this in my trainings quite often, I think is fascinating that their norms center around what was uncovered in research. I mean, my goodness, 20 years ago, and the first forays into research on sex buyers 20 years ago, there was a set of permission-giving beliefs that they all ascribe to, right? And you can see it in the way they communicate. You see it in the way they talk about victims. You see it in their nonchalance and their lack of shame in purchasing sex frequently, regardless of whether they know the person is being trafficked, pimped, is probably underage, is under the influence of alcohol and drugs, is under duress. Regardless of these factors, the studies show that they will continue to do it. And it's because they believe in this short list of crazy belief systems, right? That when you adopt this set of beliefs, because a lot of us say, well, how can they continue to do this
Right.
if it's against the law and it's so immoral? It's because they don't see it as either. They believe that sex should be it is a commodity. It should be legal if you're engaging in it. It's by choice. And they have a whole other set of belief systems that basically help them suspend the ideas that it's immoral, right? And so those are the parallels. They have their own belief systems, and they collectively encourage each other through their own depravity and the way that they describe and exploit and demean women and boys and girls. It's horrible. If you ever get into the forum.
And what I think is so great is that you'd explain this is how gangs operate in general. And so buyers then by nature tend to have these same set of permission beliefs. What's the phrase again?
Permission giving beliefs.
Permission giving beliefs. And they protect one another.
Yes.
From all of these. It's just crazy to think about. That's why for them, it's not pricking their conscience as much, because it's become norm to be okay.
And what's also interesting on top of that are some studies that have come out of Chicago, where they were studying patterns of beliefs and behaviors in buyers. And in some of their studies, they revealed they were trying to get to the root of why would you continue to purchase sex when you've noticed the things that I just mentioned, maybe underage, obviously has a pimp, maybe under the influence of alcohol and drugs, is crying in your presence, clearly doesn't want to be there. All the things where would you continue to go through with the sex act? The majority said yes, because I've paid for it. And then would you do it again later? Well, I'd feel bad, but yes, I would do it again. And so in their research, as they're getting to the root of what would actually make you stop, because if all these other things that, as you said, prick the conscience of the everyday person, what would actually make you stop? And they asked a variety of questions. And so, they're getting percentages of answers, but the most important points are that the two questions that the majority, I would say, I think it was the 75 to 85%, I want to say it was at least 75%, said that would make them stop doing this is if they were arrested and charged, or if they were publicly, I don't want to say shamed, but if their name and information was released publicly. Now, Rebecca, those two things alone, this is what is so interesting to me. Those two things alone, the arrest and charge demonstrates that what you're doing is actually illegal and it's not accepted, right? In any state, county, city, or government, it's illegal. And the other one, having your name and face shamed publicly and told to your friends and your family and your coworkers, right, shows you that it's out of the shadows and into the light, and it's actually immoral, right? What you're doing is immoral. And so suddenly their little revelry is broken down, and they realize that what I'm doing is not okay.
Right. It's by them admitting the two things that would get them to stop, arresting and public exposure, it's like it finally clicks for them. They're like, oh, why are these two? Because we don't want people to know. Well, why? Well, because we know it's wrong. Oh, weird. Mind blown.
But when they are living in their little world with all of their cultural norms, with all their other contributing behaviors and beliefs from their fellow buyers, then they can suspend all of those things, and they have a different reality in their little world, which is why some of the most innovative tactics that have been used against buyers have been really simple ones and that have involved both of those things. But in the communities that have gone aggressively against them, they have all shared publicly their names and information. And I even remember in Portland where the cops were, they were noting the license plates of guys that were frequently rolling up and down the tracks there in Portland, and they would just go and knock on the door. They didn't have anything to arrest them for. They just wanted to knock on the door. And when the wife answers, actually, I came to see your husband, ma'am. Here's why. It's because I've got a picture of his license plate that's driven up and down the prostitution track 10 times this week. So just wanted to remind him.
It's okay.
We're just wanted to remind him that stay safe. It's against the law. And so it's just little tactics that show them that we're watching you.
I am so excited. I say that with everybody because I am so excited for every one of these guests. They're all incredible experts in so many areas. That's why I'm reaching out to my good friends. Today I want to welcome nationally renowned to the ring, John Slayer. I had to do the boxing thing. He's does it better than me. John Slayer, Marian Hatcher. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So, John Slayer.
Tell us, Marian, for those of you, obviously we are reaching a lot of people who are new to the issue of human trafficking, and we want to kind of bring them up to speed. Tell us how you got this name. Tell us about the work that you've done over the last, I don't even know how long time. Tell us.
15 years. Um, so as a civilian in law enforcement, a survivor leader, I'm kind of an oddball. Um, the name John Slayer came after the evolution and the progress and the journey of my being a survivor leader, going from literally victim to peer support in the Cook County Department of Corrections, and eventually working there for the last 15 years. It's very dear to my heart, and it wasn't really so much that we wanted to slay, we just wanted to hold accountable.
Yeah.
And in the end, during all of that, I've become very good friends with a redeemed, a reformed buyer, because this thing has to come full circle.
Yeah.
We can't just look at those who harmed us as the bad guy. We have to see in there the healing. We have to see in there, hold ourselves accountable for our behavior as well, and how, what part did we take in and what happened, but also see that other side, or the other parts of the business model that is commercial sexual exploitation, as human beings, as difficult as that may be.
Yeah. No, I know. I think there's a lot of people who will be listening in. Obviously, I'm a preacher. I tend to pull in.
Yeah, we're preaching.
We're preachers, but we tend to pull in people from a faith community that want to hear stories of redemption and reconciliation. And sometimes that's hard to think through when it's people that have severely hurt others, both on a trafficking side and a buying side. It's hard. Finding forgiveness for your abusers is not an easy journey. It's not, cut and dry. It's a lot of gray in that middle. Phenomenal job. Where does this type of addiction begin, that no one wakes up and says, today I'm going to go buy a child for sex? Nobody does that. And when we say child, people picture 5-year-old. I want to also point out that the majority, when we say children that are involved in exploitation, tend to be, I would say, 12 to 18. Right. That's the demographic. When you hear child trafficking, go read the report, go read the news report, find out how old those victims were. That's not to say that people are not absolutely trafficked and exploited that are younger, but no one wakes up and says, I'm going to go buy a 13-year-old today. So where does that begin for some of these men? You've sat in John's schools, you hear men come forward with stories. Where does that begin for them as a young person themselves, as a vulnerable young boy?
Well, I'm not letting anybody off the hook by any means with my answer, but pornography has infiltrated the sense of intimacy in society everywhere, and it warps the young person's view from young men. I mean, I've talked to young high school and college students, males, who were just truthful, and they can't even get an erection without violent pornography. These things didn't exist. I'm 58, about to be 59 in a few days. These things, you used to have what they call soft porn, which was like really fluffy stuff compared to the actual brutalization of what you would see in porn. And so now that's driving a sense of intimacy and warping it, but also changing the way the brain reacts and how the brain thinks of sexual intimacy and sexual gratification. So with that said, and like I said, I'm not letting anybody off the hook, and no, all buyers are not porn addicts, or no, all buyers are not sex addicts. But in many cases they are, or to some extent they have those types of personality traits or something, that is driving what they see the use for a woman, could be. And then they want to play out the fantasies of what they can't do at home, what their wife won't let them do, or they don't want their wives to know they want to, wives to know that this is something they want to act out.
Well, they're so ashamed of how far that pornographic fantasy has gone.
Right.
Some of them don't even bring it up to anybody. Some of them don't even bring it up to a therapist because it's that embarrassing and shameful for them. And so they go and find someone that they feel is not really a human being to dispose, that they can act out those deprived fantasies on. It's this vicious cycle on both sides, right? And like you said, no one's getting anybody off the hook, but we also have to go to the root of what's causing this in our next generation, or this thing is going to be, sex for sale will be out of control. We are raising a pornified culture like never before.
Right. It doesn't even have to be to the point where we would label it an addiction.
Right.
It's just the norm. It's just the, the desensitization of what it means to be in a relationship, and what it means to spend time with the opposite sex or the same sex, in terms of a relationship. And we're talking about a relationship, and what happens in the relationship between a buyer and a victim, or the seller in this business model, is a business transaction that is built on the vulnerabilities, built on the disproportionate need, the fact that the person's basic needs can be met by this human being who has the disposable income. And so that is a business relationship. That's not intimacy. That's not sex. That's closeness.
And I love, though, what you said about this spectrum that's happened over the last, I don't even know. When I was little, not little, but when I was a young person, I would hear the terms softcore pornography, or you would see a Playboy at someone's bathroom, and it wouldn't seem today. And I think that's why parents, I mean, I'm a parent of a 20-year-old. There's lots of parents that might be tuning in. You're hearing porn and you may be envisioning things you have seen when you were younger, but I don't think, and maybe you've done this, maybe you haven't, not you specifically, but the listeners. If you go onto Google right now and you type in porn or pornography, and we've seen this, I think we were together in Atlanta at the Jimmy Carter Center when this presentation took place. Someone did it in the Jimmy Carter Center. President Carter was sitting there, and you type in pornography, and what comes up on Google nowadays is hardcore smut pornography, strangulation till women are crying. I mean, it was so horrific. People got up and walked out, and that was the first page on the Google search. And you're like, if this is what our 12 and 13-year-old boys, maybe younger, if this is their first neurological connection to arousal, we are creating a problem in our country that I don't think the general public even knows about.
Right. And the thing is, of course, when you introduce technology into this, and the fact that any young person, I mean, my granddaughter's 9 years old, she has a smartphone. And when you think about, you can only put so many safety measures in place on a phone or an iPad. And so, I can't say off the top of my head, maybe but the percentage of young adults and minors that have access to hardcore porn is really disturbing.
It is.
And so we're creating a culture that is based on violent sexual imagery, and it debases women and whoever is being purchased.
Thank you for sharing from all your wisdom and experience in this field. You have paved the way for so many survivors like me. I know I've shared that with you before, but I just love.
I'm proud of you.
Oh, thank you. I love learning from so many leaders that have gone before me. They've paved the way. There's so many. I know I spoke at Shared Hope a couple years ago. You were there. I know you were there. I think you remember. I hope you do. That I did, this ending of my thing was on the survivor stairs of 9/11. And this one set of stairs was left that took all the beating and all the hardship from the debris in order, you know, it was a physical item in order to make a way for almost 300 people to escape out this one door. Like the stairs fell just in this one angle that allowed all these people to escape. And I think of that for survivor leaders like you, Vanita Carter, Audrey Morrissey, Rachel Lloyd, so many, Kathleen Mitchell, so many that have gone before that have really taken more hits that allowed a lot of us a little bit easier path. And so I'm really, really, truly grateful. And I love you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, welcome. Today we have with us Tom Perez, CEO and founder of the Epik Project. Tom, I'm so excited you're here.
I am glad to be here.
You do some of the most incredible work surrounding demand. What we know in the human trafficking field is demand. Maybe you can tell people that are tuning in today, what do we mean by demand as a field when we say that? And tell us about the Epik Project and all the work that you guys do.
Glad to. I did this work probably about a dozen years ago, very like a lot of other guys, started hearing about vulnerable people being exploited. And, you know, I wanted to, just being a guy, I wanted to do what guys are kind of conditioned to do. And I want to fight. I wanted to join the fight. And I used a lot of that language. And I met with a woman who was very, very well educated on this issue, and a businesswoman. And she said, you need to look at this as a business. It's supply and demand. And that began kind of a process of discovery for me, where I came to the point that I realized that if this is a business, there is a supply and demand, and if there were no buyers, there would be no business. And that was the impetus behind us getting involved, or me getting involved, and starting Epik. And that's kind of the message that we've communicated with our guys, that we're here to disrupt and dismantle a business that is exploiting vulnerable people. So that's probably the shortest description of the Epik story.
I think there's this misconception that nobody that you know, that I know, that my friends know, would ever buy sex. And
Right.
I'd love to know, like, who are the people in our community that are purchasing sex? Who are they?
Yeah, a lot of people have asked me that question as well. And I think the last time someone asked me that, I was sitting in a restaurant and they said, who are these people? And I just said, look around. There are people sitting next to you in Applebee's or whatever. It's really a broad range. One of the things that we've been able to do, because we've accumulated so much data, is we've begun to analyze and really research the nature of the conversations that we've had with them. So this is all of this information is collected in a really sophisticated way. So we were able to measure things like, where did the conversation go with this guy? Was he receptive? Did he want to talk about the problems associated with sex buying? Did he shut us off? Did he make threats? And what that's done is that's created a really nuanced picture of who these guys are. My colleague Justin, who runs this program and really is the architect of it, he's done a good job of developing, and it's still in process, but a typology of buyers. It's not just the creepy guy in the trench coat around the corner from the elementary school. It's teachers. We literally intercepted high school teachers trying to buy sex from their classroom phone at one point. It's professionals. It's doctors. It's trade, and it's a cross section of men in just about any community. I think the notion that in our culture that men are entitled to just have sex however, whenever they want it. I think that's something that's become so normalized. The media, the movies, gaming, all of that kind of perpetuates this idea that men simply can get it whenever they want it, however they want it. So our sons are growing up in this. It's just become really normal. The way I look at it too is and it's been that way since I was a kid. I'm not immune to it, but what's different in the last 25 years, let's say 20 years maybe, is you have all this online technology now. and it, there was already a fairly healthy fire burning, so to speak. And technology is like pouring high octane jet fuel on a small little campfire. So it's just accelerated the ability of people to access all kinds of information that previously was just, you had to work really hard to find it. Now you don't. You just have to turn on your phone.
What are some of the men saying when they're caught? What's the response? And I know there's other terms. I kind of want to have you dive into a little bit, not only responses, but there's things that we would call in the industry prolific hobbyists, first-time buyers, people that are predatory and engaging and looking for, can you bring a friend? Can you bring a little sister? Things of that nature. We see a lot more on Vice stings. But talk to us a little bit about all of the gamut of what you're seeing in terms of frequency, and then what their responses are when they're caught.
Yeah. Well, the system that we've developed, when a call comes in, will tell us whether or not we've engaged with this guy before.
Okay, so it tells you if you've already talked to him once.
Yep. And
Wow.
it's kind of funny because a lot of these guys will say, when finally say, hey, this is who we are, they'll say, well, I've never done this before. And we're looking at our monitor, the dashboard, and says, well, actually, we have a call history of 6 previous calls.
Oh my gosh.
And we'll remind them of that. So that kind of fuses that excuse. So I think there's a lot of guys that just, when they're exposed, they want to avoid it. They want to run away from it. Our volunteers, our guys, are so good at keeping them engaged at that point, because we're not here necessarily to out them. We're not here to even to shame them, because I think the shame already exists by the time they make that call, by the time they,
For sure.
what we're going to do in a really humble and graceful way is kind of step in the shame with it. And our guys will say things like, can we just talk about what this means? We'll say things like, I had no idea that this is what was going on. And it kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning. It's so normal that
Right.
a lot of these guys think, hey, this is something it's okay for me to do. And they because they're so steeped in the culture, they have no idea of what this is actually doing to the women on the things.
Is sensationalism of the creepy guy that's doing this underground child sex ring, he's thinking, well, that's not me. I'm just watching porn. I'm just going on the regular open web, seeing if there's any girls today. I'm single. What's the harm? And so he's thinking that he's not fitting in this ring of buyers.
And he shows up at the hotel, and she's not in handcuffs, tied on the floor and, looking beat up. She appears as if she's really happy to see him. So it does, it reinforces that perception.
Right. And we have a smile slapped on our face out of fear, because our kids are being threatened at home if we don't bring in a quota. So and I've had buyers that have asked me, like, you don't have a trafficker, right? And we're like, of course not, baby. That was in the 70s. And we just move forward, because if I said, yes, actually, and he's holding my child, and if I don't come home with a quota, we'll all be beaten. Still on the mood? Like, you wouldn't say that. You'd risk losing, you'd risk losing the money that you were going to get. So no victim says that. Or they'll say, like, you're putting yourself through college, right? It's like they're justifying their one bit of conscience. They're justifying their actions. And so we're just like, yep, if that's what you need to hear, that's what we're doing, putting ourselves through college.
And having seen it on the other end, there's a lot that they kind of have that self-righteous, benevolent view of what they're doing, and they have said literally, well, yeah, I'm just helping her out, and they reduce it to a transaction, and again, it's just, that's the way we've been taught.
Where does this start for people?
Well, I think there's we call it the buyer journey, and actually this is a common kind of paradigm even in marketing. Right? To get somebody to move from a non-consumer to a consumer, there's a process that advertisers want to get people to go through, and what we've observed is it's a very similar kind of a trajectory for the buyer. Yeah, and I think you had said it earlier, no one wakes up in the morning and, and says, I think today I'll go buy sex. They have been, things have been so normalized, the narratives of they've been fed from the beginning have, given them this sort of entitlement, exposed to peer group that reinforced that notion. Then you add accessibility and availability of the market, so to speak, the online market. So it's just kind of step by step, and eventually they come to that point where they've investigated, they're deciding if they're going to purchase, and some guys and never do it again. Some guys do it, and it might be a few years, and they'll do it again. Some guys become evangelists, so to speak, for sex buying, and they'll join a forum. They'll start talking to other buyers, and their behavior progresses even further. And that's that's that kind of that really steep slope down into the really predatory and violent nature of this. So it is a process.
Yeah. Talk to us about the business. And I'm not just talking about the business of demand, but talk to us about where people are calling from, what you're seeing ads that are suggesting where victims are, things like that. I'm so fascinated about like best and all of that stuff.
Yeah, the businesses ending sex trafficking, I think is what it stands for. Yeah, they've done some really, I think, pioneering work in looking at how this put out in the marketplace. What we have observed that I think is consistent with a lot of what they have put out there is that sex buying happens a lot during business hours, or it can. Now with COVID, like who knows where it's going to go now, but pre-COVID, we know just from some of the small internal, kind of little tests that we've run, is that guys are using business hours to attempt to buy sex. We've run these patrols at all hours of the day, and we had a lot of times at mid-afternoon, late afternoon, or right before lunch. It's not uncommon to see a surge in guys online trying to set up a date, usually when they get off of work.
Could you imagine finding out from your boss when you get called into work that they knew that you accessed a website where people are sold on company hours with company equipment? And, the other thing with ads that I can remember seeing when we've done just, UC work is with cops and with investigators during ally investigations, is that oftentimes ads will be posted and it will say within 1 mile of insert large company name. So whatever large business is in the town that you're in, whoever you are listening right now, think of that one business in your community that's big, and know that there are ads that are popping up and saying lunchtime special 1 mile from insert company name. Like those ads exist. And those are real victims. And oftentimes those are posted by real traffickers. But if that's what buyers are seeing, and then you happen to slide in there and be one of those ads as well, the buyer just doesn't know if they're buying a trafficked victim or a willing participant. And do they even care? Do you feel like there's any kind of remorse or?
Yeah, I think, again, the answer is nuanced. I think some guys genuinely haven't, until like we have this conversation, hadn't connected the dots, and they'll say things like, I had no idea. And you can just, it's tell that there's some genuine remorse. There are other guys. I listened to a exchange with, and he was, it's pretty scripted on our end. There's, we want to communicate certain things, so they're not doing it, but our volunteer was faithfully trying to manage the conversation and get the guy to engage. And he just said, whatever, dude, I just want to get laid, and hung up the phone. And so that's, we've experienced guys that are kind of across that range. Some guys want to argue. Some guys want to have lengthy debates about how this is between two consenting adults. It's, all of the things that you can imagine. And those conversations can go on. I've heard them go on sometimes for 30, 40 minutes with a volunteer. And we've trained our volunteers to say, if they still want to talk, by all means, keep them on the line, because if they're talking to us, they're not.
This might actually be painting this picture for our young men that are 17, 18, 19 right now. They're being, they probably are already at least seen pornography once if they don't already actively engage. They're probably going to be pressured to attend a strip club at some time in their college life. And they're picturing human trafficking as these underground child pedophile rings. And we're forgetting this average young man that's thinking, well, that's not what my buddy's doing. Well, that's not what we did when we were in the strip club. So that must not be me. And I think that's what you're seeing with that arguing. It's like, they're like, no, this is consenting. And you're like, well, did you know, though, that a good percentage of those girls aren't there in consent? They're there being trafficked, and some of them aren't 18. And like, it's like they don't want to believe that the child pedophile rings they're hearing about on the news and what their friend is engaging them in on a forum, on a game chat, in a strip club are actually the same thing.
Yeah, I think with the narrative that's bought in is so strong and so compelling that when they're confronted with the possibility that it might not be true, it's a real upsetting and disruptive experience for them. And that's why our posture towards these guys is not to punish them, not to shame them, or make any kind of counter to their threats, but to simply speak truth to them. I think that's why it's so powerful. And to me, it's a very hopeful thing. And again, not every guy is going to be willing to listen. We know that.
Yeah.
Not a lot are. But I think we've grown up in a culture that says this is okay. And I think the thing that drives it is this toxic view of what it means to be a man.
Yeah.
A lot of people have done a tremendous amount of work in this area. It's referred to kind of generically as toxic masculinity. It's a way of being a man that's built on entitlement, privilege, on power and domination and violence and all of those things. And it's toxicity by definition means toxic things down the connections that to flourishing in life. When you ingest a toxic stick, and it starts to eat away at things that are healthy. And so all of those ways of looking at being a man can be toxic. And it's the idea that I can use someone, and people it's about me, and what I need and what I want, whatever, dude, I just want to get laid. It's the most important thing. So right. I think what we're trying to do is really put out a counter narrative. We call it generative masculinity. Generative means life-giving, so the antithesis of toxic. And this is what we teach and train our guys, and we want to talk about things of life, not only to men but to the people around them, to the women around them. So it's things like humility. It's the ability to see who we truly are. And we've had some tremendous conversations with buyers that start there. It's like, this is who you are, and let's talk about how we can change. It also has to do with empathy, and that's just the ability to see the world the way it really is. And I think that's where real change happens, is when we finally start to realize, like some of these guys, when they go, I didn't know that this was going on. My favorite in terms of what narrative masculinity is all about is this idea of meekness. Really kind of archaic word, and people don't. It doesn't automatically. It sounds like we as men, we're conditioned to think being weak is something to be avoided. But this meekness is not about being weak. It's about use the strength that you have as a human being for in a disciplined, constructive way. And so we train volunteers. Your voice is really has power, especially when you're talking to others. And then about being generative is having a just an appetite for justice. We talk a lot about appetites. You know, our appetites drive everything that we do. When we're, you know, when we're hungry, when we want to experience something, we think a lot about it. And so what we're trying to talk with our guys about is justice. And one of the things that means is this is a long game. It's, you know, it's not one simple little social media post and yay, you're doing justice work. It's actually a whole lifestyle, and it takes a huge commitment. And our guys just exemplify that in 100 different beautiful ways. So sorry, I kind of put there a little bit.
No, I love this. And I know you're working on a book that we cannot wait to get and learn more about all of this generative masculinity and all of the things you just went through. You know, if you guys aren't following the Epik Project on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, on all the places that you go, please check out. Give us the website one more time, Tom.
Epikproject.org.
Epikproject.org. Lots of icons there that you guys can go find your favorite form of social media, and keep an eye out for Tom's book, which I'm excited to read. We've been talking about it for a while. Thanks for sharing so much on demand. If you could give one more tip before we end our session on demand, what would you encourage moms and dads to do with their sons? I know we have a lot of moms of sons that listen in to what we're doing. As you yourself, me, myself, I have all girls. I don't have any sons. People ask me tips all the time. I'm like, I don't got a clue. I think Jesus didn't give me sons for a reason, because I think I would have ruined them. I would have been like, why do you have feelings? This is weird. Just sex and anger. No, I'm kidding. I have clearly trauma. I've obviously worked through that over the years, but I don't know some tips to give moms always. I mean, I have some ideas, but I think when you're working in this magnitude to see this progression of a buyer and this life cycle of a buyer, what are some tips that we can do to raise generative masculine sons in a culture that's so hypersexual right now?
Gosh, I feel like I could kind of riff that for a long time. I think the first thing, and this is pretty consistent with me, the first thing that comes to mind is I think the best we can do for our son is model humility. And I think moms can do that probably more innately. If dad is there, I think the power lies in a son seeing his dad walk with humility, that he sees, you know, he doesn't see his dad viewing himself as the center of the universe, but, you know, he sees his flaws. It was a struggle for me with dad early, and my dad changed profoundly, but I never, until late, I even heard my dad say, "I'm sorry," or "I was wrong." You know, we're way upstream from trafficking, and I think that's important for parents to see, that if you want to protect your kid from being trapped, you got to go way upstream. And I think it's things like demonstrating and acting with consistent humility. That's where I would start. Yeah, I could go on and on. But.
You're welcome to go on. We love these tips. I mean, this is why people are listening. They want to know how to protect their kids. And I think this topic for me of demand was really important, because it wasn't just about making sure you know what to look for in terms of who's buying, but for me, this is about protecting our sons and daughters from engaging in commercial exploitation on both spectrums. We are living in a pornified culture like never before. And how do we do that well? How do we protect our 4 and 5-year-old boys and girls today from becoming that 19-year-old in the strip club, or that 35-year-old that's buying on a lunch break? Like, how can we move the needle back and start now?
I would say maybe don't think so much about protecting as you do about building up the resilience, the character of your kids. When I played football, we spent hundreds and hundreds of hours building up muscle mass. And it wasn't so we looked good in a bathing suit, it was because having, which I didn't anyway, so just, get that. But the reason we built muscle mass was so that we could protect ourselves in athletic competition. The muscle mass is there to protect the body. And so I would encourage parents to think about, how are we building the character of kids? And are we building character around the things I said earlier: humility, empathy, meekness, having a hunger and an appetite for justice? And by that, when I say justice, I mean the way the world ought to be. I think that's a really helpful understanding of what justice is. So you want to protect your kids, build up those kind of muscles, build up those character muscles, so that down the road, when they encounter these situations, they will have already done some, they've put in time, and they'll have the ability to withstand that pressure. So I think, not to say that being aware of what your kids are doing online and all that, that's really, really important.
For sure.
But there's a ton of, I don't think parents see often enough, is the importance of I call it the upstream work.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
build character muscle with your kids.
That's so, I don't know if anyone else listening right now feels like, boom. I literally, Tom, I cannot wait for your book. I just think it's going to bring so much wisdom, and you carry such a father heart for people, as I've already shared a million times. I get teary-eyed talking about it. You just carry such a father heart for everybody, for men, for women, for boys, for girls, and these tips and the wisdom that you bring of doing some upstream work, building. If you want to protect your kids, you start by building character muscles. That's going to be the new t-shirt for Epik Project. I love what you carry. Thank you so much for taking the time today to help us learn how we can break down the stigma, the stereotype, the sensationalism, so that people know, no, I'm actually might be engaging in this, and I didn't even realize. But also that you can help moms and dads of sons build. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for your leadership, boss.
All right. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you guys next time. You guys, that's a wrap. I want to thank our sponsor, #RealityCheckIt, for bringing all of this information to you today. Please make sure you check out our YouTube page, where all of these guests have their entire full-length interview. And if you like what you're hearing and you like what you're seeing, please share it on social media, tag a friend. We want to get this information out to everybody that's interested in this topic. And stay tuned for an upcoming podcast where we explore all of this into anywhere where you watch your favorite shows. Thanks again.
Have you ever wondered what it's like to start over with nothing?
Human trafficking. It's the largest social justice issue of our time.
What happens to women and children after they escape, after they complete a program?
How do you start life over again with a renewed sense of purpose?
Elevate Academy was birthed from that.
Elevate is an online school that offers courses, mentors, small groups, in-person chapters, homework activities, and job opportunities.
So that survivors of human trafficking can start to actually dream again and then create steps to get there.
By partnering with us financially every month for 1 year, you not only change the course of a survivor's life, but also her children and her children's children.
But it doesn't stop there.